Well, welcome back to the new season. Season 5.
I know,
How did that ever
crazy.
happen? This season, we're going to be talking a little about fear, how that manifests, how we deal with it. What does it look like? What does it feel like? How is it different for everybody? Um, I'm Jen Severance. I am a burn survivor since 2017, and that's kind of what I bring to the table.
My name's Lori. I am not a survivor myself, but I operate in the burn realm. I've been a burn advocate for about 15 years. I'm a social worker, and I am what I like to phrase as a holistic trauma therapist, meaning I work with trauma and how it fits and is in your body.
Yeah.
So, briefly, we're going to talk a little bit this first episode of Fear. We're going to talk about fears. Fears are what I like to phrase as that dreaded F word, honestly, like the probably scariest F
It
words that
totally
I come to
is.
think of. And just how we're impacted by fears, how they affect our life, how they affect our healing. So,
Mhm.
are you ready to explore a new season with us? Come, let's get healing.
Yes, today we are going to be talking about that most scary of scary F words, fear.
Mm.
Yes, indeed. When you hear that word, fear, what comes to mind?
I think for me, like, I immediately connect it to, like, frozen, big, hard, scary. Like, I get, like, a body response when someone says the word fear. There's just, like, this little
Yes. Yes. I think for me, when I've been thinking about this, we've been talking about this topic, avoidance is a really big thing for me.
Mm,
Like, I don't wanna face that. Let's go do something easier. Let's go to sort of, take a different avenue. Let's avoid it. Let's let's get away. I don't wanna deal with that. So, yeah, I think this will bring up a lot of interesting thoughts and feelings, and I'm excited to explore, avenues to take that maybe a lot of us want to avoid it, but let's face it. Let's take this head on.
exactly. And just like how we start many of our series and think about many of our concepts, as we start with that sense of a definition, because we
Yeah.
really want to focus on, factually, where's this coming from? And then how does it personally impact? So when we think about fear, fear basically is our emotional reaction
Mhm.
to something that we perceive as dangerous. So the big thing to note here, fear is based on our detection, our individual detection of whatever threat is lying. Now, that threat can be picked up by a variety of signals and whatever we perceive in ourselves, in others, in the environment. That threat that we perceive, that danger that we see, that cues our fear is based on our own individual previous experiences. So it can
Yes.
build and it can mount. And fear mobilizes our internal response system, which that's something we've talked about in previous episodes, just like our inner wiring that is built around our experiences, how we brought into this earth, what we've gone
Mhm.
through on this planet. So our inner response system, which then leads to our physical reactions. When we have fear, like we can often go to a heart racing, breath gets really shallow,
Mhm.
quicker breathing, our muscles tense up, our eyes
Wow.
actually widen, our pupils get bigger, we start scanning. So all of this response surrounding fear.
Ah, and, we might get into this a little later, but it's really interesting that I'm here hosting with you on this because, fear was almost literally what caused my burn accident. Because I have a vasovagal syncope, which causes me to faint, and it's like old-fashioned fear fainting. So kind of funny that we come to
You
this
know,
topic.
here's our first connection point, Jen. When I was younger, I had vasovagal fainting.
Oh my
And,
gosh.
like, literally up until the last time it happened was years ago, but, like, that was completely explored thoroughly because it happened at school, it happened at
Uh-huh.
work, and so when
Mhm.
you just say that, I'm like, A,
Oh
that's
my
something I
gosh.
didn't know about you, and B, I'm in the same boat.
Oh my gosh.
Whoa.
Yes, so we both know, like, very intimately the physical feeling of fear and what that can do to us. And that brought us together. It's crazy.
Crazy.
Just crazy. Oh my goodness. So let's get right to us personally. And what do you notice when you get afraid on the inside and outside? And I'm already talking, so I'll get right to it. Um, a and I can take this right and connect it to burn. Um, when I was burned, we didn't know that that's what happened to me, that
Mm.
we knew that I fainted. I fainted in the kitchen, and I was cooking, and I don't even remember standing up, walking to the stove, picking up the big giant vat of boiling water, and then going down. I have no recollection of the accident that caused my burn. Um, but it turned out, and we were thinking about it all through being in the hospital, like, what caused this fainting? And I can remember watching Netflix and watching something scary and having this physical reaction, this and just like all those things you mentioned, the blood pressure going up and, this wave of fear, irrational fear, and for me, it physically caused me to pass out. Um, so for me, I have a very intimate knowledge of the physical reactions of fear, and of course, that can be touched upon in more simpler parts of life, just, things that come up that, obviously, I'm not gonna run into a bear at the supermarket or anything that would cause that sort of
Hopefully
big
not.
reaction, but I know that we have smaller things in life that can cause us these feelings of fear. What kind of stuff happens to you when you think of that?
For me, like, if I think about, like, inside and outside, on the inside, I become hyper aware of what's
Mm,
going on, and maybe some
mhm,
of that is, like, my own work really on kind of processing and working through a lot of my past traumas to get to my current places. I am very body aware, but I feel like for
mhm.
me, I almost hear and see all of my body workings really big to where it's like that's what I see, so it's like I see the fear in my body.
Ah,
And it gets to a point where it gets really, really a big feeling inside. And then for me, a fear response, if I hold fear long enough, I can like check out of it. To where
mm,
it's just like I just like go away in my brain and my body to kind of almost block it out. Another term for that is disassociation. So that can
sure.
often happen with some of my fear points. So that's some of my external is I have memory gaps of big situations in my life that my fear protected me
Yeah.
by blocking it out.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, so it can be super debilitating,
It
like
it can be, and again, like, there's a variety of fears, really, if we think about, like, fears, and there's physical fears, there's
mhm,
relational fears, there's emotional fears,
yep,
there's mental fears, there's spiritual fears, and I'm gonna just break it down a little bit. So physical fears, things physically surrounding us that can offset those fears. So those can be physical fears around our basic needs.
mhm,
Do I have stable housing? Do I have transportation? Am I getting enough food? Am I getting enough water?
mhm,
Those can be physical fears surrounding. Am I living in a safe enough place, environment? Can I protect my own sense of safety? Physical fears could be of certain animals, of certain objects, of certain ways of doing. And then our relational fears are more built around our relationships or our social experiences.
mhm.
So, fears surrounding being around a bunch of people,
Ah,
being around only a few amount of people,
yep,
being around authority figures, being around others that, that fear of I might get abandoned, I
yeah,
might get rejected, I might get pushed back from. Emotionally, again, like around our emotions.
yep,
Some people have fears of certain emotions because they've been taught or raised or led to believe that certain are okay and certain are not okay. And
mm,
some emotions create bigger responses in our body than others. Mental fears are really revolving around of kind of a lot of our inner thoughts and our inner workings. So those fears of failure, those fears of being wrong, those fears of how we're perceived to
Sure.
others. And then our spiritual fears around our own sense of existence, death, faith, morality, those bigger life concepts. And so fears beyond that can even be broken down into 3 different types of fears. And you mentioned one of them. There's rational fears.
Yep.
There's more of those primal fears in our system. And then those irrational fears. So rational fears, basically, okay, there is a real and imminent threat in your system. That is the bear's coming into the grocery store and, you got to get away. I mean, that is rational. That is valid.
Sure.
Like there is a real danger there. Our primal fears are those fears, they're innately programmed into our nervous system. For example, when you hear a really loud sound, you respond, you react. That is built within you. Loud sounds, low guttural sounds, extreme heat, extreme cold. We're going to step away from our fear. We recognize that as a fear when our skin touches, when we react, when we respond to it.
Yeah, that prompts an innate response that we're programmed to avoid danger, pain.
And then the irrational, those are the fears that maybe they don't make logical sense, sometimes to ourselves, sometimes to others. They can vary from person to person. For many people, those are like your phobias. Like, I'm afraid of spider. I'm afraid of snakes. Okay, like not all spiders are dangerous. Not all snakes are dangerous. Sometimes those can be like, I'm just going to avoid interacting with any spider, with any snake at all. Some people can perceive that as, that's kind of like big or crazy or whatsoever. But the big aspect is your fear is valid. You're the one experiencing it. You know the response it makes in your system. So whether it's rational, primal, or irrational, how your system reacts and responds is what makes it valid. What of those kinds of fears, I can share a little bit of one of the ones or some of the ones that I've experienced, but I'd be curious to know like what types of fears you have faced. For me, a lot of my fears that I come up tend to be more relational and emotional. I think for me, and some rational, but some more on the irrational side, but a lot based around my experience. I have a lot of relational fears because I've had a lot of relationship wounds. And my relational fears lead me to, I tend to step away from or avoid social experiences, big social experiences. Funny. I do a podcast. I work as a therapist, but yet I have relationship fears, Right. I also believe in facing your fears. But then again, with those relationship fears for me, or relational fears, abandonment, rejection. I've been through those experiences. So those are really big fears that can offset my system and make me walk into relationships very tentatively, very slowly. My emotional fears, definitely I was raised with a sense of some emotions are okay and some are not. So when I go to an anger response or a sad response, I almost tend to hide those and hold those back. So I've really had to do a lot of work to get to a sense of okay with every emotion is valid and has a reason in our body. We are pre-wired with the ability to experience emotions because that's what allows us to story and live our life experience.
Yeah. Wow. And I can very much relate to the relation. I think probably most people can in one way or another. There's something called rejection dysphoria that I'm very familiar with, but it's this expectation that you're going to be rejected. And that might come from previous experience, your childhood, growing up, schoolyard bullies, whatever it may be. But it tends to infect your relationships as you are an adult. And that's one thing I can totally relate to where, someone doesn't text you back and you're going, oh my God, they don't like me. Or maybe they're mad at me. Did I say that wrong? You start to go through. So I think there's a certain amount of anxiety that most people can relate to where you start reading into things. And even that, just being triggered by something like a text message or, who knows, someone's late, whatever it might be that triggers you, you do have that physical feeling of like, oh my God. And that's a pretty common fear response these days with all of the technology and texting and social media that we all deal with, and this feeling like everyone's watching us, even though really in reality, no one's really watching, like we're not that important. But yeah, there's that fear going on with with relationships. And yeah, I think that's a big one, and I think it's kind of all encompassing. But I'm sure we'll get into a little more of that a little later in the podcast here.
We will.
So let's see.
What fears did you go through in your burn injury? I know we briefly touched on
We did touch on this.
that, but when you think about a burn injury, and I mean, I can only speak from witnessing and supporting and walking others through one. You have that lived experience. So when you talk about, all the different aspects of fears, what did you walk through with your burn?
Oh gosh, it's interesting. Like I said, I was pretty much unconscious for the actual burn. I very much remember, waking up on the floor and my husband above me going, "Jen, Jen." And that's where it sort of began. The fear began there. It wasn't the experience of being burned, it was the experience afterwards. And
well, your
the
initial fear
hospital.
response was stepping out of it.
Right.
It was just that shock and drop response. I mean, that is a
Yes.
response.
I mean, well, yes, I had the physical response. I wasn't there for it mentally. But waking up on the floor, and then sort of this slow realization of, why am I on the floor? I'm wet. Oh my gosh. Wow, this hurts. And then it just went everything. I mean, it was a lot after that, until I got to the hospital and they gave me something for the pain. But a lot of the fear after that, I think, was based on the recovery. And I'm sure all you burn survivors out there that are listening can certainly relate to that. The accident itself might be almost just a short little snippet of what we experience afterwards and the fears that we have surrounding our burn. And I think a lot of that is more psychological than the physical.
So some of those mental fears
exactly
that come up because of the physical
right.
healing process.
The physical healing process it's sort of like, well, it is what it is. I guess it depends on how you deal with pain, but I walked through it going, well, I'm in pain, and it becomes almost like a white noise. It sucks, and there are different levels of pain, and you might need to treat the pain with painkillers. You might just treat the pain mentally by, learning to focus on a different thing. But I think a lot as a burn survivor, it's how are we walking forward from the burn? How are we feeling about showing the public, showing our loved ones what's happened to us? Are we covering everything up? Are we feeling confident about, yeah, this is me, this is what I look like now? So it's interesting, the various ways that we're affected as a burn survivor. And I'm sure you see it from the outside, because you have just been for so many years counseling and being there for us burn survivors. What have you seen? I only know my experience as one kind of burn survivor, and I always feel like, gosh, mine's my experience, and mine is one kind of burn too, because I've met a lot of burn survivors. Mine was boiling water and fainting and just being doused in boiling water. There's fire, there's chemical. I've met people with all sorts of burns and how they walk forward through that. So you've seen a little more of the different kinds of burns. What's your experience there?
I think, if anything, it's made me more aware of just how individually injury can impact us. For you were able to pretty early on face your fears. Whereas for others, pain could be a huge fear factor. And every time that pain comes up, just be a constant hit mentally, physically, socially. For many that I've seen, if we want to walk through kind of burn injuries and just the impacts physical wise, being separated from your family, being in a hospital, having procedures, treatments, therapies, dressing changes, things that you can't choose. And you start to you can fear them and just get overwhelmed by them.
Oh, it's funny because you just brought back thinking of, as you're talking, I'm like, I was just thinking about the dressing changes. And a burn ward, for those of you who don't know, it's these nurses and doctors are just juggling and handling all these patients, and they might plan. They would come in, Jen, your dressing change is in an hour. And for that for that hour, you're going, oh my God, 45 minutes, 35 minutes, 25 minutes. And that, oh my God, talk about fear.
Mhm.
To be able to anticipate, that's one thing too. If you have scheduled fear.
Yeah, well, there's your mental right there too.
Right.
And also the factor of how often did it happen in the context of exactly as it was told, Jen?
Yeah. And that hour would pass, and then they'd say, "Oh, sorry, Jen. This other thing came up. Now it's going to be in another hour." And so you had the next hour to be like, "Oh my God, it's coming." In case those of you who don't know, a dressing change, and it's a really horrifying experience. And on the burn ward, you would hear someone go in for that, and you basically are going into a shower and the debriding the burns, and you would hear screams. And I mean, it's really but a burn ward is not a fun place to be. And if the family is there, they're having to listen to that. So when you know you're going to be going in for this procedure, it's dreaded. It's dreaded. Yeah. So yeah, you just brought that up. Thanks, Lori.
Let's go to the relational piece then.
Yes.
Like relationally, your fears, like what I've seen in the burn world, is a lot of times it can affect your sense of being able to have your family, your friends, those you're close to, present. And so many people tend to try and trust and develop relationships within the context of those who provide care. But then these are also the people walking you through procedures and different things that you don't want to do.
Yeah, well, they're so important. Those people that work in the burn centers are
100%.
amazing. I mean, I still remember the names of many of the nurses. I even had a little journal where I wrote the names of the nurses and like what's cool about them, and oh, this is my favorite or this is my least favorite, depending on how much empathy and care. But they stick. These people, they're in your life during this emotional time.
Well, you also pointed out too that sometimes your fear can allow you to develop some sense of bonds when you can also see kind of the encouraging and the engaging and the support surrounding.
Absolutely. Yep.
Definitely, like emotionally, I've mentioned like with many burn survivors, fears of pain, blocking like the angry, the sad, the scared responses that can come up, having guilt or shame surrounding a burn injury and any of the process of the healing, or others' projected emotions surrounding their injury and how they're moving, how they're going through it. Mentally, you've talked on, like there's changes in how you see and perceive yourself, how you live through your life. A lot of people can struggle with sleeping, with concentrating. They see their self change, and that can be a huge fear factor, which then gets people into that questioning place. A lot of people through a burn injury and healing process will often question their faith, their existence, like death. Why did this happen to me? And it shapes you as a person.
Yeah.
It so can shape you as a person, and your level of support internally and externally has such a huge variant in that. Like, how do you feel? And I know we're going to speak on this in a future episode, but briefly, how do you feel some of your fears, like, and what you walked through in the context of your injury, shape you to who and how you are
since it happened? It's interesting. I don't sweat the small stuff, and I guess I have a certain amount of compassion for others. I was thinking about this, about fear, and even before my burn injury, when people are jerks, which I deal with a lot because I work.
Which does happen in life.
I work in the public and I work retail, basically. I work in a pharmacy. But I try to have compassion for people who are jerks. And here's why. Because I feel like jerks are dealing with some sort of pain or fear. And they are taking it out on everybody else.
They're
projecting. And so, and as someone who has experienced what is said to be one of the worst fears, or not one of the worst fears, one of the worst pains, the burn is just one of the most painful things that you can experience. And having been there now, it almost helps you to clear out some fear, because there's a certain sense as a burn survivor of being like, well, I just dealt with one of the worst pains that a human being can possibly fear. what do I have to be afraid of
Mm.
physically, as far as sort of that physical fear realm? Um, and that's not to say, let me tell you, I still feel pain, of course. Of course I do. But there's a certain amount of, "Oh, come on, you can handle this. You've been
Mm.
you've been through the worst," you know? So, yeah, it's interesting going forward, just having a sort of a supermanish kind of or superwomanish, superpersonish kind of, tolerance or acceptance, I guess it would be, the sort of acceptance
Yeah,
of what pain is, and how I deal with it. So that's kind of one thing that I walk forward with is this feeling of, "Ah, I can kinda handle anything now."
I love that. You've
Yeah.
learned to kind of face and allow and like hold at least that particular emotional response
Yeah.
to where it's you aren't pushing away from it and you can more be present in your interactions with yourself and others and
Mhm.
see yourself as kind of like more of that whole being that you are.
Yeah, for sure.
And that leads us right into our takeaway for
Alright.
today. So each episode, we really try to teach or to share a skill, a tool that you can use to navigate whatever we've been talking about. A big aspect of coping and living and healing through life is not only the relationships, the people we surround ourselves with, our community, but also the skills, the tools we have to broach what we need to. And since you're a human, you have fears. Every human being in this world has fears. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to work with one of our fears. And I would encourage you to pick one that maybe feels broachable for today. Maybe it's not the biggest of the biggest fears that you've ever
Mhm.
dealt with in life. Maybe it's something related to your burn. Maybe it's something related to your healing. Maybe it's kind of a mental fear you have around one of your beliefs around just a body symptomology, whatever it may be. I want you to think on a fear that you might be okay with working at today. And we're going to do a little bit of a body based fear flow. So, anytime we do any type of body based exercise, it might be helpful to close your eyes, avert your eyes, just help yourself center and focus in. And I'd start by getting yourself to a settled position, whatever that means, whatever that looks for you. Maybe taking a few breaths in and out to center and settle your body. And in this exercise, we're really going to connect with the heart of this fear. It's not about really removing it from you, from your life, but going into your fear through the body, helping it feel less big. And so, first, think on where is my body holding this fear today? Now, that may sound like a weird question. You may not initially think of your body when you think of a fear, but stay with me on this. As you focus in on this fear that you chose to address today, notice how it shows up in your body. A lot of times, our fears can show up as tension, as clenching a body part and area, as a fluttering, a movement, a faster heartbeat, a change in your breath patterns. Considering this fear in your mind and continuing with your breath, scanning your body and noticing where do you hold it? Where do you notice it? And just notice however you notice it. And then start thinking on what is this fear like in my body? How am I holding it? You've located a spot or two or more that's holding your fear. Just see if you can notice how are you experiencing it? Get curious about it. We're going to go for curiosity over judgment. It's not good or bad or right or wrong. It just is. Notice its qualities, like you might explain to someone else. Does it have a certain color? Does it have a certain shape, a certain size? Is it hot, cold, warm? When you breathe, does it shift? Does it change? Does it move? Get curious about how your fear is presenting, about how it's appearing, how it's showing up in you. And then you're going to notice what's happening now as you see it, as you feel it in your body, as you notice how it shows up. We're going to do a little bit of play with our fear. So we're going to play with moving toward that fear in your body in an intentional manner. And it doesn't have to be serious. It can be more of, I'm going to explore with this. I'm going to get curious about this. I'm going to try this on for size. So maybe that play might be exaggerating that part of your body with a movement that gets you more deeply in contact with sensations. Maybe that play, maybe I'm going to breathe into this or send deeper breaths or thoughts or intentions to this area. And noticing as you play with that fear and how it presents in your body. Every so often asking yourself, with my curiosity hat on, what's happening now? What am I noticing now? Being with any sensations, any feelings, any noticing of that fear as it arises. And just notice what it's like to see it, to hold it, to get curious about it, to flow with that fear. What did you notice, Jen?
Well, that brought me to thinking about where I hold fear, and it's definitely in my breathing. My chest, my right in here. So yeah, that exercise forced me to breathe. Just a huge part of
living.
Well, yeah, surviving, living. Yes, breathing is very important. But yeah, when I do feel fear or anxiety, I mean that's my first go-to is to be aware of where our body's going and addressing it. And then breathing is a huge thing with meditation and yoga and that exercise that you just put us through. Breathing is so important because just taking some breaths, taking a moment, being mindful, it can really pull you out of that state.
Any type of awareness exercise too, anytime we're placing intention, thought, focus on our body, on things that may be perceived as uncomfortable in our body, breath is always a great way to keep yourself grounded and keep yourself focused and moving through that intention. And a lot of these alternate therapies, that's really kind of what Changed by Fire is about. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that really work with supporting the healing of burn survivors and family members, helping people not only live, but really thrive through an injury, focusing on a lot of the social, the emotional, the psychological realms of support, using alternative healing modalities, things like EFT, hypnotherapy, music therapy, art therapy, scar massage. So many of those tools, breath work, and really building a sense of community, connection, and hope after an injury.
Yeah. And that I can tell you from personal experience that Changed by Fire has brought all of those modalities and especially community to the healing process. And Changed by Fire brings us all together for all of these events and offers us all of these different ways of healing and thriving. And half of that is just all of us coming together and having that community. And yeah, with that, HEAL. We have a nice little acronym today, based on this session,
and on the name of our
podcast. We're so clever. Let's do it. H. Have a look at your fears. E, empower. Empower yourself to witness them. A, acknowledge their presence. And L, let yourself learn to see, feel, and live through your fears. Look at that. Aren't we cute?
We are.
We are cute.
We'll see you all next time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye.